Can we sign in? Like, do we have internet?
No, that won't happen.
Business would be to select.
So see what they say.
Facilitator. You guys do great, note taker, so he's gonna let us know.
The timekeeper.
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
You are wonderful. Now you can figure out what I need.
Yes, I'm not very good at math, but I'm gonna try my best.
I can take care of that.
Thank you, Mandy.
Facilitator.
Ursula?
I'd be happy to.
You.
Write down that we're starting at 9:51. Is that good with everybody?
Fantastic.
Okay, and
We divide it all up.
Note taking just got more difficult
we-
since there's no internet.
yeah, so we're supposed to have, let me go back to, we're supposed to have four.
I didn't think of that too.
You know, we switched it to four, I do believe. Yes, because he said each one had to be 15 minutes. Oh my goodness, where was that? Because remember he had it 20 minutes and they said, no, it's got to switch to 15.
Yeah, I think
15 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, for the three,
Oh,
there are three things we have to, three.
there are four things for round one, 5, 6, 7, 8.
But they're wanting us to get through round 1, 2, and 3.
So we need to divide by three first and then.
Okay.
Yeah. So
All
we
right, so
have
that was
round 2.
better math than what I.
It would be 40 minutes for each section.
40
We
minutes
have
for
2
each.
hours.
40 minutes for each section. I'm gonna write that down.
So 10 minutes for each,
10 minutes for each thing.
which if we need more time, we need more time. That's okay.
Each. Okay, well, I'll set a timer for 10 minutes and then I'll just let you guys know and then we'll go from there and adjust. Does that sound good?
That's great.
All right, I will. Thank you for the math support. I am a history teacher, so.
No. Math is like literacy.
That's what they say. All right. I'm starting now, 10 minutes.
Can we take a second and just recognize norms?
Would you like to go over this?
Yes, I kind of mentioned it to Adam. Because there were some comments that were offensive yesterday through the course of discussion. And I just want to make sure that we recognize in our discussion, we recognize diversity in thought, as well as diversity in experience. Trying to be understanding of and microaggressions. And I know sometimes microaggressions are things that we don't even know we have, but recognizing that some of the things that we say do can be seen as stereotypical, offensive, and revealing some either implicit or explicit biases. And so I just want to kind of just make sure that we're understanding of that.
Thank you.
Yeah, and can we maybe think of when we get back together, revisiting norms as a whole group and sharing that?
I think that's a great idea.
Anything else regarding the norm?
And I might have missed this. Did we didn't elect a facilitator? Yes, you are. Fantastic. Thank you, Ursula.
Yep.
I think I was trying to figure out math at that point.
So I think just to anchor ourselves in the norms, would you mind if we just read them out loud? So we'll just return. So I'll start with the first one. Be present, be on time and participate. Take care of self as needed. We will take regular breaks. Please refrain from checking their tasks.
Give and receive warm and cool feedback respectfully. We critique work and not people. Critical analysis is part of the continuous improvement process.
Speak your truth and understanding of truths that differ from yours. Embrace different perspectives, assume positive intent, and take responsibility for impact.
Notice power dynamics. Power shows up in many different ways. Be aware of how you might be unconsciously using your privilege and power.
Step up, step back, be mindful of taking too much or too little space.
Thank you.
All right, so let's clarify our first task. So it says round 1, focus area 1. Brainstorm possible attributes of the focus area concepts, discuss what you know and have learned about the focus area concepts, identify questions to which you would like responsive, and identify resources that you would like to have to support deliberation. And I am just clarifying the task because I'm a little unclear. Does that pertain to slide 3, which is focus area 1? Is that what that is? Okay, so good. So an analysis of any modification needed to current assessments to ensure that they are valid and authentic to the work of teaching, reasonable to implement in a wide range of classroom settings across the state, and appropriate for beginning teachers as it pertains to formative assessment. Is that correct? Right. So with that, let's begin by brainstorming possible attributes of our focus area concept, which is formative assessment. And just a reminder, when we're brainstorming, we're just putting ideas on the table. We're not, going to critique or anything like that. It's just about getting all those ideas on the table, and then we'll go through a process to prioritize those.
Do we need to, I know there seemed to be some discussion and confusion on the term valid, authentic, formative. Do we need to spend time clarifying those, or?
I think the purpose was for us to say, what is it?
Formative.
And what do we think? Well, I think the whole list, right? Valid, authentic, formative.
Reasonable?
I think it's trying to flush out and interpret what does the law mean when it says that, right?
I believe so.
Well, you can't determine validity or authenticity without data. In order for any assessment to be deemed valid or reliable, you have to have results that you're looking at to effectively evaluate the effectiveness, the validity, and authenticity of an assessment. And I know we were requested or mentioned to add on that. That's something that we need. I don't know.
And I believe that was provided in item 3B. There's those 2 handouts, 3B handout 1 and 3B handout 2. And so perhaps what would be beneficial is to take some time to go through the data that's in there. Because I know when we developed, for example, the LAPA, we went through a whole process to ensure that that was a valid instrument, as well as a reliable instrument. So the psychometricians came in from Pearson. We went through a whole process to ensure that what we had created was actually valid and reliable. And I believe that we did that as well for the TPAs. But I think it's a good question, and I think we should take some time to look at that data. Does that sound okay?
I'll just throw one thing in there. I think there's also two ways of looking at valid and authentic. There is the psychometric, statistical aspect of it, but then there's the regular teachers aspect of it that are in the classroom. What do they think is a valid measure? I don't really care about the statistics, maybe. I don't really care whether it's valid statistically, but I can tell you that's not a good measure, right? Or whatever. So, and I think if we go down the purely statistical piece, then I think everybody did their job with that. And that isn't, I don't think that's one of the issues, the statistics part of it. I think that everybody did their job, whether it was RDI-TPA or TPA.
Yeah.
Right? I think the statisticians did that. And they're sort of immutable in a way.
And I think when you look at the data, what you're also going to find is that they did survey the field. And people had an opportunity as that was created to give feedback.
Okay.
And so that data was also taken into account. But I don't think it's for me to say that to you all. I think you want to see the data and you want to know and understand how this thing was created and what feedback was involved in the development of that. And so I think it would be wise of us to take some time to look at the data and find out exactly how it was composed.
I think unfortunately, because these are all links, and if we're not able to get online,
You can't open any
We
of
can't
it.
open the data right now.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, we can't
Well,
do any of it.
you know what?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Amy. Internet.
Oh, the internet's back up.
There we go. That's the shall receive.
There you go.
And Ursula, would you be able to point us to the actual number?
Yeah,
We can-
so it is,
There's a lot of information on that.
If you
Okay.
go to the agenda item and you go to item 3B,
Okay.
you go to handout 2,
Is it 2-2 with all the links? Is that what I want?
item 3B, handout 2, which is, it's right here.
I have this one. Okay.
Yep, that's
Yes,
it,
all right.
that's it. And then, I
That's
mean.
not on the list that we got, the whole list. Because that's what I'm working from at the minute.
Yeah, I'm looking from the same document. What number do you have for us to point to?
So if you
Yes.
click on 3B, it goes to this document
Yes, for sure.
and then scroll down there.
Scroll down. Yep.
So then let me point you to some things where I think you might be able to locate that information. So I would say. So there, item 6 is program leader surveys where they collect some feedback from candidates. I am not 100% sure where the community feedback is located, but I believe it might be in item 1, which is 5E. And then there's the public comment, but that's from EdTrust, which you can read as well. I would recommend that you read bullet 3, which is 2C annual report on the commission approved teaching and administrator performance assessment, because that contains all of that information. And then also item 2D options. Oh, well, that's related to this. I think we're good on that. All of that to say all of the information is in here in a link.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and so what I was looking for, I don't think in the sake of time, we can really dive into the statistical data, kind of like what Colin was saying. There's a lot of information there, but we're looking at results, you know, in the spread of results, how many passed, how many, you know, passed on their first attempt versus their second attempt, you know, those types of things. There's a lot of information. I don't know if we can, if there's actually time during this time to dive into that, or if we
What
just.
we could do is we could divide and conquer.
We have 5 seconds for this 10-minute section.
Or do we want to spend 3 months?
There you go.
So let's talk about that before we move on. So option 1 is to be able to do 15 minutes, and I don't think 15 minutes is going to get us very far. What are alternatives? How else might we structure this time?
I think I do believe that to test the validity, you need statistics, but I think still a piece of that missing with those statistics would still be, we're losing the quality of the program too, because those statistics, the validity could be Cal State LA doesn't only speaking to them because that's what maybe we don't have as many as passes the Mingus Bills or something like that. So I don't know if we can even say that the it's valid or not. It's based on program,
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
About the
Yes.
funded program.
Yeah, so
So when we think about how we want to spend our time, because you're right, Devin, it's like those 15 minutes sure went by quickly. So we need to make a decision for how we want to spend our time. So our task is to brainstorm possible attributes of the focus area. And so we were looking at the related data, but we didn't even have time to get into those things. So as we think about how we structure our time, we could say, okay, you know what, we're going to dedicate 10 minutes. You check out that link, you check out that link, you check out that link. Everybody takes a link and we come back together and we share what we've seen. If we feel that it is essential that we walk away with that information to inform our decision. If we don't feel that it's necessary to walk away with that information to inform our decision, then we can just move on to the next 15-minute segment. So let's talk about that.
I'll just throw this out there. I don't think that the TPA is designed to be or can be a formative assessment.
I think I'd like to talk about that one in some detail. I think it's crucial as to what we're supposed to be giving recommendations around, and I think it's probably one of the most complex things to do. discuss really.
Okay.
Okay, I'll start the 10 minutes for point.
Can
number
I-
three, Or,
I really want to get to that conversation, but can I just add to something with valid and authentic before we move on?
Mhm.
So I agree. I've read all of the information from Pearson showing the validity and authenticity. I would challenge that because in the focus area, it says valid and authentic to the work of teaching.
Mm.
And although I think the assessment has been reviewed and authenticity has been determined, I don't think in the context of the work of teaching that it actually meets the standards of authentic and valid. And I think that's more work to be done. And I'm not sure the method in which to do it. But
Be sure that you note that in the notes. Whoever's taking.
she's taking, make sure you know yourself.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Okay. So will we be moving on to formative? So I can start the 10 minute, okay, 10 minutes gone. Okay.
So I think it's important for us to recognize that this was in 1997, right, when it was established. And I don't, just like everything else, things change. And so I don't know if what was defined as formative back then is how we define formative today.
Yes.
So do you want to take some time to talk about the definitions of formative? I know I went into Chat GPT and I asked it, define the term formative as it pertains to teacher performance assessments, and it spat out something. But I don't know how you folks feel. Like, do you want to take some time looking at the definitions and discussing them? Like, what would be the best use of our time?
I know you said you felt pretty passionate about this, so what are your thoughts on
Yeah,
formative or the TPA being a formative assessment or formative in nature?
formative is like, it's on this continuum. Everything they do is formative. If you've been teaching 20 years and you did it 20 years ago, as your TPA or whatever it was, then you're still building on that. I mean, you're still actually building all the time
Right.
and developing. So, and it's the same with in schools. We give them an assessment, even if it's the final assessment at the end of the school year. That's still formative in the sense the student is taking that away and they'll use what you've ever given them back in other classes maybe, or when they go to college. So it's still formative, but formative would mean that there's a specific feedback loop that you get that enables you to improve that work. And it's the final, and then there's a more final piece of work that you then submit. So the formative, right at the beginning, will be like, here it is. Let's give you some more ideas on what to do, and then you can implement that and you build on it all the time. I don't see how these were any of the TPAs were designed to be formative in that sense. The feedback that there's no official feedback apart from a score, and that is really bad teaching. It's actually we do to kids in school. So I don't think we should be doing it to ours and then thinking of it as being formative. We would have to really rethink the whole process of what they get as results of it and how they get that.
Seems like it's more of a summative assessment of a program, rather than a formative assessment.
I think maybe in the notes, maybe that's a definition of time that we need. Like, is it over the career span of an educator? Is it over the 18 to 24 months they're in a teacher prep program? Because yes, you make a good point that it is formative if it is in the lifespan of an educator, right? Because you are continuing to learn. I mean, I've been teaching for 14 years and I'm still refining my practice, right? But at the time, though, if you look at it in the micro, it is not formative. It is incredibly high stakes. So it is in high stakes is summative in nature.
We have a legal requirement to give them an induction plan when they exit the program, and there's no requirement within that to refer to their performance assessment. It's nearly always you're writing about their clinical work, you're writing about their coursework and other things. People don't often put in, well, I only got a 1 for whatever it is in my RDI-TPA, and so I need to work on that. Partly because no one knows why it was a 1. Right? There's no feedback as to why this was a 1 and not a 3, and what you need to focus on to get it to a 3 or 4 or whatever. There's none of that verbal feedback that we would give as classroom teachers.
Yes, for sure. And that's, I mean, that gets to the heart of one of the first things I said when it came to being a part of this entire work group was we're looking at this piece of assessment, but it didn't seem anywhere within all the documentation, all the charges and the focuses that we look at the assessor and, take in consideration assessor bias. And, and I only bring that up because I work with candidates who have submitted TPAs 3 to 4 different times in the past. Each time there was a huge discrepancy in scores and results. The first time they miss it by 3 points, they revise it, they resubmit it, they get a condition code by someone else. Comes back, they revise it, they resubmit it, they miss it by 2 points. And this was before the secondary passing standard. They revise it and resubmit it, so there's this huge discrepancy and there's no feedback why, there's no really clear understanding. It's just, kind of that assessor.
Even the same material gets scored different.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's something that happens a lot when they resubmit is that they're taking a chance that what was a 3 goes down to a 2, and sometimes it does. And so even though they got the 1 up to a 2 or a 3, they've now lost it because they're down to a 2.
Yeah, and I know that's not part of what we're
Yeah.
focused on now, but no, I'm sorry. Yeah, I was just gonna say, I know that's not part of what we are really charged to do right now. I just kind of wanted to throw that out there to keep that in mind that, that is still one of the areas that eventually needs to be
And I
addressed.
think there's a lot of variability across programs, right? Because do you know what your institution's pass rate is for TPAs?
Yeah, I don't like to say though, because we have so much privilege and so much money and so many resources that it's incomparable. It's like 98%.
And that's what ours is as well.
See, we changed ours. It was 40% and we moved it to 100% first attempt.
That's good.
But even in that,
What caused that
we
change?
do have big worries about the bias though, because those students that the 2 or whatever, the 1 or 2 that don't pass the first time tend to be students of color, tend to be first generation students, tend to be students who don't know how to play the standard test game.
But yet they got into Stanford.
Yeah, we have, I mean, we deliberately, well, I'm not supposed to say.
I think
I'm not saying anything about it.
one thing I'm stuck on, Devin said, and I don't know if I'm misunderstanding, but you said it's a summative assessment of the institution.
I think so, because everything that they're being assessed should have been instruction and support received while they're in a program. And so I look at it as that piece. It's a kind of a summative assessment to kind of reflect on, because they're in a teacher education program. Everything they're doing in that program is designed to help support them, teach them, prepare them to be an effective educator. And the TPA is aligned with that. If that makes sense.
Yeah, and then, if we think about the Collins point of it being, as a teacher, you're constantly looking for feedback on your own practice and continual improvement. But if what we're actually doing is more giving an assessment of the program, that's not benefiting the teacher. And that's not fitting into the way that we want to develop as professionals and understand our role. So I think that may be a crux that needs to be called out and worked through because, and it was brought up, who is this formative data for? What do we want? Do we want it to do? Assess our programs, or do we want it to be meaningful for our candidates? And that's.
And I think that's probably why they're asking us to consider how it can be embedded into coursework and field work. Because
That's
I
one of the
think
things
there's
that
a,
we did.
there's
That's
an
what made a difference
awareness.
for us. You were asking what did we do? That was one of the first things that we did.
Yeah.
So I would like to, on this train of the whole thing with the formative assessment, I hear a lot of like, no feedback, right? And then it's the assessment of the program. who's assessing the outside assessors? Well, if there's outside assessors assessing this TPA, then how is formative feedback even possible? I'm trying to think as a classroom teacher, if I'm saying like, okay, let me check for understanding here, but then I step out of the room and I have somebody else coming in to then ask that question, and then they leave, and then I come back in. I have no idea what
And
just
all you
happened.
get is a number.
I don't know that needs this, and what do they actually need? I see a number, right? But is it, what part is it that I need to reteach in this moment? And so if we are outsourcing or farming out, like maybe it needs to be, like you say, embedded, but it needs to be like embedded. Like, I mean, like the scoring should be happening as we're going through, to have it be by someone they know, right? To have it be truly formative.
Or should it be formative?
I
Or
was just
should it
about
be
to say that. I was just about to say, I mean,
Yeah.
for me, it would, a simple fix would just be, let's eliminate the word formative.
Yeah.
It's formative.
Right. I know.
So that's not-
Recommendation to consider that, because if it truly isn't formative, then why would we be calling it formative?
But that would be going to a senator and asking for a change to the statute, which I think is
Stranger
outside,
things have happened, right?
which I think is outside the scope of what.
We got 1 second.
I'm saying though that our interpretation of formative, if it has to stay, is that it's formative in terms of induction program. That it can only be.
Good point.
Which would be,
Do we need another 10 minutes on this subject? Okay, so we will.
Give us five.
5. Okay, now you're making me really do the math. Okay.
Because I mean, the word's in there, so the word isn't going to come out, but we can constrain the use of that
It is
word
defined as.
to be more realistic about what is actually happening. Because for everywhere, it tends to be it's a summative piece that we ask them to do. You know, we don't ask them to do it in November, you know, unless they're graduating in December. You know, it tends to be something that comes at the end because they need to have done all the other stuff in your course to even have a shot at doing this.
Well, that was another change that we made. So rather than waiting until the end of the program to have them do this, it's embedded as pieces of the program, so they're progressively, so they do cycle 1 halfway through our program.
Oh,
And
right,
then
okay.
cycle 2 at the beginning of the last semester.
Which makes sense, because planning and assessment, right, which is cycle 1. I mean, you have to know that as a teacher, right? You have to know how to plan and assess.
And luckily, our course offerings aligned itself with some of the changes, like, you know, your cycle 1's gonna have to be on math. And so during the time that they're in courses, they're receiving a lot of methods courses and knowledge based on math instruction. So it kind of aligns itself with that. It just kind of fell into place, but.
Is that RDI-TPA or Cal TPA?
Cal.
You're right. See, that's another significant difference is ours, the RDI-TPA has to be a unified teaching moment of the same class for plans, instruction, and assessment. It has to be the same 3 to 5 lessons.
so
So
overwhelming.
you can't do it.
So we can't spread it out over the pieces. They have
That's
to
the
be
Ed
over the,
TPA.
yeah, that's the RDI-TPA. That's the major difference.
I think the idea of the TPA informing induction is interesting because I don't work with pre-service teachers. So I work with clear credential candidates. And I never have had a candidate say, well, my TPA said this, so I want to keep working on this.
Right.
It's like I explain our induction program. They say, oh yeah, that's like the TPA. And then we start over, like, okay, here's the CSTPs, where do you want to work on? And we start a cycle. So ours is all designed around.
Yeah.
So adding that.
That's been my experience as well.
Yeah.
I have never had one of my
Yeah.
inductees come and say, this is what I did on my TPA.
They're
I've
just
never
like,
seen the results.
The TPA was,
It was awful.
I don't want to talk about it.
That's all we get, right?
So like, you know, I mentioned, I think having that kind of disclaimer, I guess, being formative in nature as it relates to induction.
Or is it formative in nature in terms of their preliminary program?
It's just so tricky because
Because you mentioned, right, they say, oh, I don't want to talk about it, let's move on. Well, then it's not applicable to that phase of the credential process.
they
It's,
don't see it that way.
yeah, it's, yeah.
And I would say that's exactly why we're here. That's why the law was introduced in the first place, is because we actually looked at what people in the practice were saying about the experience. And it's been such a negative outcome that there's something that needs to be
Well,
addressed.
I mean, I wonder what role it plays that you can't prescribe content in the induction programs, right? So that's an automatic disconnect,
You
right?
can't, what, sorry, say.
You can't prescribe the content to your candidates. You have to offer an array of content and they have to select the content. So that structure doesn't necessitate that they work on their TPA. So I don't think I think it's a issue of semantics and logistics around that.
And the relationship between these two parts of earning a credential.
Right,
So this team talking to induction team
right.
and looking at how do we all
Yeah.
support.
Because we offer preliminary and clears, and the two don't talk about that at all.
Oh, really?
No, because like you said, right, people are done with it and it's like, okay, let's move on.
When you say you offer clear, that means that you're responsible for the induction program. for
Yes,
those.
we
Okay.
actually offer one of the largest induction programs in the state of California. It's
Okay.
almost 4,000 candidates
Wow.
across 7 continents.
I want to learn about yours. We'll add that to our list.
Yeah, you probably know Tanya Almeida if you've been to the induction conferences. Oh,
That's our extra 5 minutes. So we are, I mean, guys, we are not getting anywhere. I'm just letting you know.
We're not getting through the
What we agreed on was we agreed
Yeah,
that we're defining formative assessment in terms of the program, their preliminary program.
Yeah.
Is that accurate? Correct me if I'm wrong.
Say that one more time.
I believe that what we did was we said, if this is a formative assessment, it's formative through the life of their preliminary program. Because it's an assessment of the
preliminary program means to the clear credential.
right, because
And do it 3 years or whatever.
Phase
Okay.
1 is the preliminary program, which is usually an 18-month program. Phase 2 is a clear program, which is the induction program.
Okay.
So is everybody
I didn't
good
know
with
that.
that definition?
so okay. I mean, in that terms, it's like a part A and a part B.
Yeah.
Right? So yes, the part A would be formative, I suppose. I think my concern with that is that are they still getting the feedback that a formative assessment would provide?
They're not in the
And I
current.
would
Yeah.
note that in the
Yeah.
notes, in order to make it formative, we need to. So we have accomplished something.
Feeling the formative discussion was probably gonna, that seemed to be the hot button issue yesterday, and so it was gonna carry on to today.
Can I,
Yeah, go ahead. Okay.
just before we move to the next one, I respect that that is what the group thought is. I guess I would challenge us and say that I don't think that's in line with what the law says. I think
Tell
the
me what
law,
it says more.
I think the law implies that the formative nature is in the beginning program itself and outside the scope of induction. I don't think it's looking holistically at the whole. I think the law is implying the beginning. I think it would be great if there was more connection between all of it. I think it'd be very valuable for the candidate. I don't think that's what the law's.
So Mandy, can that's a great way to lead into what I was thinking for the last few minutes that we're supposed to have in round 1, is that we are supposed to identify questions to which we would like responses and identify some sources that maybe we could ask for to support for that deliberation. I think what you're talking about right there is perfect. So let's I'll just put, I mean, I think I'm gonna put 15 on here, and then let's talk about those things, if that's okay with the facilitator. Yeah, so number under round 1, identify questions to which you would like responses, and sandwich or combine, or whatever you want to call it, identify the sources that you would like. So I'll put 15 minutes for these two that are supposed to take 30 minutes. And then that way we can clarify any questions that we have for them, and then we can move into round two.
So I guess I'll add the first question, is the formative process inclusive of both the preliminary and induction process?
Mhm.
I think another question I would like more information about is because I, in practice, do not see a connection between the two. I'm wondering, because the law says that there should be a connection. So I guess I'd like to see how each program tries to inform the induction process, because I think it might be different at every school.
How each program how each program uses the performance assessment.
What we want to know is across the state, right? We don't want
Yeah.
to look at program. We want to know what is the intent of the assessment? Is the intent of the assessment simply to inform the preliminary phase, or should it be informing the induction phase as well?
Well, I know I guess my question is, I know there's an induction plan that candidates leave their program with.
Right.
I'm just wondering, what does that look like? And how does it get to the district where they start their induction program?
That's a good question.
That's in you need to see
Yeah.
we need to see the statute that introduced the induction. I mean, there's a statute somewhere that introduced the induction plan.
For the induction program, it would be.
It was only 4 years ago that we had to start doing induction plans. I mean, we did do something that they took with them to their bits of coach or whatever it was, but it was formalized, I think, 4 years ago.
I think it was longer than that.
Was it like that? Yeah, time flies.
Yeah.
Share what we do, but like I said, it's unique.
It's unique.
Each program and district.
And I think part of the complexity is that most institutions of higher ed don't offer induction. They offer preliminary credential programs, but the bulk of the programs that offer induction are LEAs.
Yeah.
So I think that's why it seems a little foreign to some of us here.
And so I think though, to Devin's point of the validity earlier, Mandy, I think where you were looking for maybe data, forgive me if I'm getting this wrong, but for data for program specifics, how they're doing, that also tests the validity, I think, of the assessment, correct? If we're looking just at statewide data, I think we might need to drill that down to see that for the validity piece, like, well, is it working in LA County or is it only working in, San Francisco or, whatever, right? So where is Orange County doing better versus LA County? Is Riverside County doing better than Imperial? Those kind of things, right? Yeah. If we can look at San Bernardino.
Are you talking about pass rates or are you looking at induction? What are we looking?
What's better?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think my concern after the discussion yesterday was hearing stories of teachers getting into the field and still trying to pass the TPA. And I'm like, wow,
I think that's specifically related to COVID, right? When COVID hit, because there was those executive orders that allowed candidates to basically put it on, they could attempt to pass it if they wanted to, but they didn't have to pass it. Because remember when COVID hit, all of the testing centers were closed down and all of
Give them
that.
2 years extra.
Yeah, so
Yes
they-
and no. I think that's a huge part of it. But there are also candidates who complete programs. They're not technically program completers because they haven't passed the TPA, but they're still in classrooms. I mean, they've been given emergency permits, or some of them are
that's what I was saying, because even when I was going through my program, I through my initiative, I got mine done as I was student teaching, so I was ready to go. But I had people in my cohort who were like, "Oh, I'm gonna wait because student teaching is so difficult. I'm gonna wait," and I'm like, "Well, that's not doing it within the program, right?" So
I think you raise a great point, which is what does the data say and how many of those people are there? And if it's a minimal number, then it's not a big deal. But if it's a lot, then we need to know.
But yeah, I mean, if one Cal State institution is pushing out 100% and one is pushing out 50%, I mean, why? Right? That'd be my question. Why? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm worried when we start evaluating institutions and lecturers and
And I think that's.
it's the pass rate when the only for schools, which I do know a little bit about. The only valid measure for evaluation is if you have a really good benchmark for when the students come in. And how you move them on is what the benchmark should be. We don't have any real benchmarks for when candidates come in to our institutions that we can say, we did a really good job. They still didn't pass their RDI-TPA, but they got like a bunch of twos. And if you look at their profile when they came in, we did a really good job with them. But that isn't going to count in an evaluation when you're just looking at pass rate.
And that's the same arguments that teachers make, right? For
Exactly.
K-12 outcomes. They say, oh, you know, these kids, due to their family situation, due to the culture in the neighborhood, they just can't perform.
That's a different argument, though. That's not what I was making at all. I'm saying that you have to move students on. We believe that all students can move forward. But you can only move forward. You can't suddenly make up for, I don't know, a very weak elementary school that didn't do a good job with the reading, and they come to you in middle school, and then you've got to make up for 5 years of elementary teaching that wasn't that great because they just happened to have a teacher that wasn't focused on reading or whatever it was.
And that goes back to, and this is why this whole process can be extremely complicated and tough. There's so many different elements and so many pieces. Going back to what are we really expecting and doing in a program for beginning teachers? You know, the TPA, is it appropriate for beginning teachers, and what are those beginning teachers expected to be able to know and do? That's also dependent upon the instruction they receive within a program. Some programs are,
Yeah, that's question D.
hardcore on certain things, you know, classroom management. You know,
We
some
have
programs have
planning and
a lot of that.
assessment, instruction and reflection. That's what it's measuring, is that right? Planning and assessment and instruction and reflection. Is that bar too high? Do you think?
What's appropriate for beginning teachers is,
Yeah.
that's, you're gonna get 10 different responses.
And it
from
goes to
10 different people.
the validity of the assessment, because that could be regional, right? I mean, based on, if it's Stanford, you have every resource that you could ever want. And if you didn't have it, you would ask and you would
Yeah, we
receive,
would
but
probably go.
not everybody's gonna have that, right? So I think that's a big question.
But
Yeah.
it goes to the, I mean, my biggest worry about validity that, and we haven't really talked a little bit about it, is I know that the candidates that I have that struggle, that need a lot more support and to get to the threes, and that often need to be retaken, find it difficult to write about what they've done. What they've done is, when you look at their video and you go, wow, this is a great classroom, all the kids are engaged, you've got presence in front of them, they're all listening, it's really active, their lesson plans, they're culturally sensitive, everything you want is there, but you can't write about it. Right? You're struggling with the writing and explaining what is in there. And that is my worry, where some of them get the 1 and the 2. They didn't really understand the prompt. They twisted the prompt around in their head so many times, and the anxiety, which is absolutely real. And you know, I think we should prioritize recognizing that we know the anxiety that it causes our students is absolutely real. I don't know any student that doesn't get anxious by it. Some so anxious that it's really seriously problematic, that they won't even turn up to do it, as it were.
I would argue same thing for the LSAT, same thing for the bar exam, same thing for the exam to become a doctor.
But I would ask the question, and this is data we don't have because we've never asked, is how many people are leaving their programs because of the anxiety related to doing the last hurdle, right? So how many quality teachers are we losing in the field because they can't get over that hurdle? And I guess, Pat, piggybacking on what you said, my follow-up question to that would be, so then are we assessing their writing skills or their teaching skills?
They say they're not. Yeah, you know, you can write it, you like.
But if the assessor can't interpret or understand what you've written,
Yeah.
Then they can't give you the score.
Then they can't give you that, and if you haven't read the prompt in the way that a standardized test, which we know, you know, I mean, all the research says how racist they are, and you know how structured all of those things are against students that first year, you know, first generation, and so on. If they can't interpret that prompt, they're not going to be able to get down their ideas that say, this is why I did this, because you know And that's hard to do in a program, is to build that skill. And, you know, I don't think anyone's done any research, but depending on where their undergrad was done, is certainly something that happens, you know, that affects it as far as we're concerned, without a doubt. And it is different. I mean, our anxiety, we have, I mean, I'm responsible for what, 60 students. That's all we have in each cohort, 20 elementary and 40 secondary. And so when the anxiety is there, one of us jumps in straight away. We see it as soon as it's happening, and we can do that. You can't do that when you've got 1,000 in some of your institutions and some of the others. That's not going to happen. That some of them are just going to. I'm not showing up anymore. You know, it's actually the best thing they can probably do, because it's making them unwell, the whole process. And I think that that's something that really needs to be prioritized in this whole thing. I'm just so glad to see it about the wellness and anxiety that it causes and stuff.
So can someone answer this question in this group for me? How often does a teacher prep program go under any kind of review?
It's every 7 years for accreditation, but it starts a year in advance. So yeah, about a year and a half in advance, you're connected with the individual from the commission and the lead for the accreditation visit. They start reviewing your evidence and whatnot.
And are they reviewing pass rates? How many people that you're pushing?
Yeah, so what they do
Okay.
is, depending on how many programs you offer, like I indicated, we offer preliminary, clear, and admin credentials. And then there are the common standards. So there's usually a common standard lead, and then there's a lead who's going to review each of those distinct programs.
Then the data should be out there, then what we're kind of asking, right?
Yeah,
It
and I
should
think
be,
that's all we
yeah.
need to do is add
Yeah.
the data.
That's nice.
No. I really appreciate what Colin is saying, and I think in our work, it's important to decide are those skills of breaking down a high stakes, the prompt for a high stakes test, and the skills of being able to respond using academic language, written academic language, the skills that we think are essential to be an effective teacher in California. And I know there are varying ideas about that, but I think it's important to call it out and come down with a recommendation. Because if that is holding people back, I mean, if you watch their video and you see they engage with students in a way that you'd say, I will sign my kid up for your class.
Yeah.
But they're not able to get into a classroom because of those skills of breaking down a prompt or using written academic language. Are we denying kids a great teacher? Are we denying a great teacher a career?
I think we are.
So I think just like, I know that that's underlying everything we're doing, but I appreciate calling it out and looking at how we collect data on.
And then
whether you're ready.
when I think about, okay, so teachers who enter the field, teachers who struggle, and they're placed in high need areas, is that really helpful? I don't know.
We also need to think of the alternative. I mean, I agree
Mhm.
that there are some excellent teachers who struggle with this category. But on the other hand, there are some poor teachers that do exceptionally well.
Yes, really?
Yes. There are some
Oh,
teachers who in the classroom, they have no management skills. They're just really struggling in the classroom, but they can
but they can
breeze
pass.
through the calc.
But it's the relational piece that they don't have. It's not, yep.
Even some of the stuff, I mean, you know, so one of the prompts around, you know, cultural awareness in whatever it is, and they know what they should write, but I don't.
They don't believe it. They don't believe
You
it.
know, but they know how to write that particular answer.
They're savvy, they
Yeah.
know.
And it does go, part of that as well is to do with the document that I referred to, and I forget whichever number it is now, there's so many numbers. That actually talk about the passing rates for some content areas, and I was shocked to see the difference, the discrepancy for world languages.
Yep.
Yeah, it's not a surprise though, these people are multilingual, very often that are taking that. So they might not have the experience in how to respond to those prompts.
It's interesting because the research around being bilingual says that given time, they will outperform every other group. And I was so
On
excited
standardized
for
tests.
standardized tests, and that plays out. Like if you look at the macro level, because they do disaggregate it by, if you speak multiple languages, and those people outscore everyone else on the Cal APA and on the TPAs.
But the pass rate for EdTPA, for world language teachers,
lower.
Yes,
is
and,
lower, significantly lower than,
and that may be specifically related to EdTPA.
right?
Yeah.
Okay, facilitator, I would like to bring us back to the schedule. We have about 1 hour left in our time, if I'm reading that correctly, to say 10:40. So we're supposed to have
He said we don't need to be back until
11:50.
50, I have it written down here, yes, so we have breaks built in. Would we like to shorten to like maybe a 5-minute break so we can get up, walk around, and then come back and then spend the last 55 minutes trying to get round 2 and round 3 squished together?
I think that we're really doing well.
Yeah, these are great discussions and we have great questions. I think we have plenty of questions to bring up. All right, so I'll put 5 minutes on my timer, but I guess you guys could probably do the same. And then we'll be back in 5 minutes. Cool. All right,
We get some more.
yeah, and it's hidden, it's behind the.
They did bring cups though, too.
That's not going.
Great, yeah.
Oh, I have to go back down.
Feels
So,
so confident.
as a timekeeper, I suggest that we have about 1 hour until we're supposed to go back. So I would like to set maybe 2 30-minute timers. I think that might be a better use of our time. We got 2 rounds. Let's do 30 minutes on round 2, 30 minutes on round 3. So is that cool?
And wherever we are is where we are.
Exactly, for sure. Yeah.
2.
Well, we're supposed to, according to this, we're supposed to hit round 2 for focus area 2 and then round 3, focus area 3. So that's, I was suggesting 30 minutes on this one, 30 minutes on this one.
And focus area 2 is recommendations for how programs might embed the assessments into coursework and clinical work to avoid duplicate work for candidates. So let's talk about that.
I would love to share. So this duplicative piece is what prompted CTA to initiate 1263. Because that's the piece that came up over and over and over again in new teachers' comments, was that I did it in my program. I had to do it again for the TPA, and then I have to do it again for induction, and I'm doing the same thing. And it's exhausting because I'm also trying to be a first-year teacher, right? And so it's that duplicative piece that kind of brought about the conversation of something needs to change because they're doing the same thing over and over and over again. And it's been happening for decades. And so how do we, and the law calls for it to not be duplicative, but it is in the current practice. And it's definitely part of the frustration, but also part of that anxiety too, right? And so I guess my point being the current state of being, I think it's very duplicative.
Absolutely. So what recommendations can we come up with to ensure that it's covered in their coursework and their clinical work?
And
I would love, to hear, because you go.
Well, I was gonna share, can we, or how can we do that without kind of going back to Colin's statement without putting more on faculty? I know that was one of the hurdle that many face in trying to address some of these issues where faculty are feeling in the program like, okay, now you want me to teach to the test in addition to providing all the other instruction. You want me to add something else to my plate. And so at least within our program, everyone was extremely open. We were able to see the connections and just made the natural alignment in the courses where without having to force something and being more intentional about mentioning and addressing TPA from day one, the first day they're entering the program, first day they take a class, throughout every course, throughout the end of their program. It's always, or until they pass the Cal TPA, until they pass the TPA, we make it intentional about this is what you need to do. This is an assessment. This is what the assessment is for. This is some of the things that we're going to do in our coursework that aligns itself to that assessment. Some faculty initially were resistant because they thought it was going to be a heavy load and they were going to have to do duplicative work. And when they realized that it wasn't that significant and framing it in a way that challenges them to provide the best instruction to their candidates within the scope, the mission of the institution. They felt a little bit differently about it rather than saying, hey, do this. It's like, okay, how can we best provide instruction? So it was a way that we were able to embed the expectations of TPA in the program pretty seamlessly.
In coursework as well as
In
clinical.
coursework, yes.
So would that be a recommendation that you would make?
Yes. And I would also say one of the disconnects is having the supervisors who are tasked with going out, observing the candidates during student teaching, familiar with some of these expectations of the candidate, because that's a huge disconnect. And so a lot of times candidates get extremely frustrated. They think, well, I have to do this because my supervisor is looking for this. They want to see a specific TPE. Now you're telling me there's this whole set of expectations that the TPA is expecting me to, and they don't merge together. So that piece we're still working on, but I think that's another recommendation is to
we do that.
have supervisors familiar with the TPA.
But also the classroom teacher that you're working with too has to be aware.
Yes.
Because many of them didn't take the TPA and have no idea what's going on.
Right.
So I'm gonna ask you to read back what you have in your notes about the recommendation. That
Okay. So I have, how do we address this without adding more work for faculty? We learn to be more intentional and to start embedding the TPA early in the process. Explaining that this is the assessment and what we're going to use to help prepare students to do.
So you heard that piece. Do you want her to modify that language at all? Does that capture
No,
it?
that captures it. Also, there's a piece where I'm not quite sure how to word this, where in the program, you are actually doing the same work that you are doing for the Cal TPA, rather than do this for coursework. Oh, later on, you're going to do this same thing for the TPA. So let's just do it once. Let's satisfy the need for coursework in addition to satisfying the need for it all at the same time, rather than making it.
So like an example would be in the curriculum and instruction in maths, for example, when they started to introduce the idea of what should be in a lesson plan, then that is going to go straight into the lesson plans they're going to be writing for their Cal TPA or NTPA.
Exactly.
And so it isn't duplicative in that sense.
It's just part of your program.
Yeah.
So this is how we do lesson plans at CSU Dominguez Hills.
Yeah.
This is how it goes, and that's integrated throughout.
Correct.
And
So
then,
what did you capture on the notes?
So the program should include the same work that you're doing on the assessment. And the student teacher supervisor should be aligned and evaluating using the TPA.
And you added, as should the classroom teacher.
And then,
who's
yeah.
Supervising their clinical
Yes.
practice.
so Devin, it sounds like that would actually satisfy the formative question, because if you are using this work for the TPA, then you are, it is a formative assessment at that
That's
point, right? You're just kind of summatively formatively working on it. A better terminology. So you can provide the near real time feedback, right? That a formative assessment would demand. So that might be something that we would want maybe to recommend to all programs if they do something like that.
And can you add that comment about the formative assessments that Joshua just shared?
They would be formatively providing feedback throughout the process if it is embedded.
And also, then it's formative feedback to the program for continual improvement of the program, because if I'm an instructor
Mhm.
and my students are not getting that, I know I've got to change my class about lesson planning, because obviously I'm not align.
And it's about those common standards. When they go in and they evaluate your common standards, common standard 4 is about continuous improvement. And so if you have data to show, hey, this was what we were seeing from students and we weren't happy with our results. So we modified our syllabi and our course content and we got better results. Like if you have that you can archive to share when you're up for accreditation, that will help your case.
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I did a whole presentation on this during the Meredith Fellows Implementation Conference. And so it just kind of fell in line exactly with what you're talking about right now.
So glad you're here.
But that's just one. I mean, I'm not saying that is the cure-all, but it's just one example of it.
I think it's a really good example. So long as the faculty that you're working with can see that the requirements for the performance assessment, like around lesson planning, oh, well, I would doing that anyway.
Right.
And normally that is the case because they know that it's good teaching. Right.
And it also addresses one of the things you brought up as well. For example, throughout the TPA, there's this emphasis on UDL, Universal Dynamic Practice. Candidates had a lot of theoretical understanding of UDL, but they struggled when it came time to put that into practice and write it down on the Cal TPA. But doing this, instructors were a lot more understanding and saying, okay, I'm going to discuss UDL. These are some examples how you can attach the theory of UDL with an actual example of practice. And so that really helped a lot because they struggled with that prompt.
That's awesome.
So just aligning those, the terminology.
Yeah. So I'm kind of bothered by the fact that we can't see your notes. So that's why I'm asking. Because when we share out, right, we're gonna have to share out for each of those areas, and I'm not sure what you have down. I'm sure about what we just said.
Yeah,
I'm not
but
sure
it's
about-
hard to capture it all.
Then can I ask you a question about, when you're aligning to the TPAs, does your faculty syllabi then have, so like my syllabus, right, for my methods course has TPE, this links to TPE, whatever, this links to, now do you have this links to TPA, whatever, this links to TPA?
Yes.
Okay, so it would just be a matter of going back through our syllabi as a faculty
Right.
and saying, okay, well, this is gonna link to this.
And also
this is gonna link to
modifying
this.
your matrix where you show where that TPE is introduced, practiced, and assessed.
And for EdTPA, I don't know if it's for Cal TPA, but they have guidance on every single prompt is linked to everything that they're going to be writing about and doing is linked to a TPE.
Right.
So you know that.
And that's how it is with the Cal TPA. That's one of the things that we do. So it's part A, for example, which is one of the first narrative documents. Part A, prompt B or prompt 2, and that's listed in their syllabi.
Right.
So
Is that the actual assignment they do in class?
it's related to the assignment. So they don't actually do the Cal TPA or write the Cal TPA in class, but the concepts that they're covering, the content that they're covering links to that. Right, it's preparation for that.
That's the way we do it as well.
So I mean,
So,
that can be.
I'm just asking a question. Would we perceive that then still as being duplicative? Because you're having an assignment in class that's preparing, but then they also have to then turn around.
Or is it that
And do it
it's
different,
introduced
or is it, I don't know.
practice?
Or is it formative?
Yes.
That makes it.
Because formative would be duplicative.
Right. It's required to have a matrix that shows where that skill is introduced, practiced, and assessed.
It's an awful thing to complete.
But I know it is.
It's ridiculous.
And the nature of that is duplicative.
Yeah.
But that's, I mean, any English teacher, the best English teachers would have, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 drafts that they would expect from their students in their classroom. And they were giving feedback on each of those drafts. And doing fine.
And you're teaching fractions, you spiral it because you know they need to revisit them.
That's it, and it keeps coming back up through every grade level.
Provide an example of that. So prompt A or narrative document, part A, prompt number 1 says, it's like getting to know your students. What prior content did your students receive? What are you going to teach? And how does that connect? So in coursework, they're they're taught how to look for prior knowledge or what to look for. Did you check Hume files? Have you spoken to parents? Have you, provided any assignments that, students will complete? So those types of things. So they have that knowledge once they come to the Cal TPA. So in that sense, it's not necessarily duplicative, but it prepares them to be able to effectively respond to that prompt, because that prompt is asking them to specifically say, what did you do
Right.
in your classes?
I would consider it duplicative if we're saying, here's a practice prompt for cycle 1, and then we're giving them feedback and then they're taking it. Like, I would consider that to be duplicative if you're doing a practice Cal TPA, giving them feedback and then they're taking the actual TPA. But what you're describing, I don't see that as being duplicative.
Yeah, I didn't think it was. I mean, that Mandy mentioned it. There are some components that can be seen as duplicative, but covering the content. So we don't necessarily, because in the TPA, when they take it, it's a completely different lesson that they're focusing on.
Right.
It all needs to be done in real time. And so they're doing a lot of work that prepares them to be successful on that Cal TPA rather than, well, here's, you got to have one observation on your supervisor's coming out to observe XYZ on this lesson. This is happening 6 times. Then you're going to get to the TPA. You're going to have to record a video lesson. It's going to be completely different, but you're doing all these, so rather than doing that, it's like, okay, these are the expectations of the Cal TPA. When you do your video recorded lesson, these are some of the things we're going to look for, and then as they go.
Go ahead.
Sorry, is the letter talking about it being duplicitous with induction rather than within the program itself?
Say that one.
And I thought, yes,
Yeah.
and I thought that it was also duplicative within the TPA itself as well, because there are multiple questions that can be seen
That is
as
also
repetitive.
With induction is meant to, here's all the content, right? And you say, you're not allowed to prescribe the content to the candidates. So the candidate picks their contents. They
That
develop.
they want to develop.
They develop an IIP in collaboration with their mentor and with their principal. They develop the IIP and then they go into the content and complete the content. That's pretty much.
Would it, for example, would it mean that they might be asked to video a piece of their teaching and analyze that? Because then that is duplicate. I'm not saying it shouldn't happen, but it is duplicitous.
Yeah.
But I think it's necessary in the first or second year. Let's take another look. I'm concerned about the use of this word duplicate. Really, because we want them revisiting things and improving stuff.
I would point out that we can't change the law. And the law says it has to be formative and it cannot be duplicative. And so.
Okay.
So just the TPA, right? Then it wouldn't be duplicative because you're going through different things, correct? Is that what you stated earlier, right? But we're looking at duplicative now in the induction program.
Well, it's not
Program, sorry.
duplicative in the
Yeah.
induction program
Yeah.
because it's different content that's self-selected
Exactly.
by each individual teacher. So like if we were all teachers in the induction process, theoretically, we could cover different content. Like very likely we would all pick the classroom management content because we might feel that we need that. But I might think, you know what, I'm good. I don't need the classroom management. I want to work on the unit related to English learners, for example. So in an induction program, it's very individualized.
Yours sounds really good, but I do think, I can imagine some of our candidates turning around and saying to their induction coach or their BITSA coach or whatever they're called now. When I was in my program, right?
And candidates are going to say that from one course to another.
It's different now.
Yeah.
And
Right.
in our program, we ensure that the content, I mean, obviously it covers the same domains, right? Which are the CSTPs, the California Standards for the Teacher Profession, but the content is unique to their induction program. It's not, we didn't just lift it out.
It's not duplicitous.
It's not.
I'd like to just throw a question out, going back to earlier. I understand the practice of embedding in coursework and then modeling something similar to what we want the outcome to be. And I don't know the answer to this, I just want to put it out there. Do we think that repeating it for the TPA after you've done it in the coursework, even though I understand it's a different scenario, is that valuable or necessary for someone to be a competent teacher? Or is the coursework alone effective in the first place?
I
I
mean,
never know that we need to answer it, I'm just throwing it out there.
well, I think
Going back to how effective is that assessment?
Yeah.
Yeah, what are you assessing? Yeah, no, that's good.
And it isn't education iterative in that sense that, you know, you do it this way and then you do it again a little bit more deeper and then, you know, because that's what it's called practice and praxis, because you practice it and you get better at it the next time. But we're often asking our candidates, as a supervisor, when I'm watching someone teaching, I said, you did really well on this, but let's have a look at this one again. And next time I come, I want to see you do this for that piece of the lesson or whatever it is. And you build it up like that.
For all programs, you have to complete that matrix. You have to say where you're introducing it, where you're practicing it, and where you're assessing every TPE that is in your program. So I don't know when this was written, if that matrix existed yet.
The TPEs didn't exist.
Yeah,
No.
so I think it's a question that I'm sitting with.
Restate that question for me so I can make sure.
The question is, in 1997, when the law was written, the matrix that calls for each program to indicate where the TPEs are introduced, practiced, and assessed did not exist yet. Yet, the law calls for us to ensure that the work is not duplicative at all, which seems to conflict.
And I think there's that, like, to Colin's point, or just in general, like there's value in repeating a skill.
Mhm.
And if we are able to identify skills that we think teachers should be able to continue to do, we want them to do it ongoingly. So like record yourself multiple times. It's like the best way to learn about your own teaching. And so if we can help teachers get to that point where they don't see this as an end, it's a practice. And when it's that, I think that's where the high stakes part gets tricky, where you pass it, you feel like done with that. And now I finally get to have my own classroom. I get to do things my way. And just breaking apart the idea that actually these were skills that I constantly am engaging in, right? That's what we try to do through induction.
Right,
Is
is
say,
build
like,
those good practices.
This is what you're going to be doing your whole
Right.
career.
And a lot of the things, that's how we, and that's how I've always articulated the TPA. You get to demonstrate all that you've learned.
Yeah.
You get to do this. This is your platform. You get to show, you know, the commission and Pearson, everything that you're capable of doing. And, you know, you formulate, and you know, I have this whole workshop that I call Cal TPA counseling, and it's designed to minimize the anxieties and the stressors that are related to it. And
Take
that's
that on the
part of
road.
it, is just really instilling them with the confidence, knowing you've already done this,
Absolutely.
and that part is also embedded in the program. So I've worked with some of
I
our
was gonna
faculty.
say, is that embedded in the program?
Well, yes, because I've worked with some of our faculty who throughout the program, there's selective courses in which they do the same thing, and they make it a
Right.
deliberate, intentional effort to minimize some of those stressors related to the so once they get,
When is your accreditation visit, do you know?
we have like 2 years now.
Would be
Maybe
great.
try to get on the committee.
I don't want to be, I'm so intrusive here with my time, but we got 8 minutes and 30 seconds left on this focus area 2.
Yeah, so how many recommendations do we have so far? I think we only have one recommendation, and that was to, for programs to embed it in.
The embedded
content.
piece.
We spent a lot of time talking about the.
Yeah, I don't know if
Well,
anybody else
the
has any
student,
thoughts.
teacher, supervisor piece, right? That they're aware as well.
Do we have any other recommendations for how institutions can address this into coursework and clinical work to avoid, I'm sorry, duplicative work for candidates.
And I would advise to remember what Adam said earlier, that recommendations are not necessary at this point, that if we want to come up with more questions.
Yeah.
Then recommendations, yeah, just, this
I
would be.
feel like the
Yeah.
recommendation piece is,
Too strong.
well, I think it's in the future
Yeah.
work,
Okay.
right?
So, but he did tell us to, caution,
Ask
yes,
questions,
yeah,
ask
yeah.
I mean, I think one of the questions we have is what do they really mean by duplicitous?
Yeah, I mean, we need some
Yeah, I mean,
clarification on that.
What
What's-
qualifies?
Right, but-
Yeah.
I think we're supposed to come up with what this committee is supposed to interpret. I,
That gave us the word.
1997, right, when this was written, the course matrix didn't exist yet. And so the very nature of the fact that that matrix exists calls for duplicity.
So how would a candidate, and I know we're gonna be winning with time, how would a candidate identify me? How did this concept come up? What are the components of the TPA that candidates have suggested are? Is it,
the coursework is asking them to do the same thing the TPA is asking them to do, which is then whichever pieces they pull out, the same that induction is asking them to do. So that there are 3 separate times that's duplicative. And I hear very clearly that there's value in duplicity,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
But is it necessary in order to, I mean, the law says that it shouldn't be, right? But it is in the way that our system is set up right now.
Because it's a pejorative word, duplicity. I mean, it sounds like all sorts of nastiness is happening. What we're saying is that we're scaffolding their learning.
Exactly.
They're developing their practice, they're going to practice their praxis. And, if that's duplicitous, then I don't know.
Yeah.
I wonder if this gets back to the idea of authentic. Because if kids, if students, candidates come at this as dog and pony show, it can feel duplicative because all I'm doing is making sure I'm checking all the boxes. And then you're gonna have me check the same boxes, I'm gonna check the same boxes, not as formative, informing my own practice and of something that I do all the time as a professional. And I wonder if that's where the sense of frustration around, I just have to do this over again, because it's a show I put on so that I can get to do the thing I want to do.
Instead of viewing it as part of my generative journey as a teacher, right? I go through this process.
So I guess I would ask, how can we change the process to make it formative and supportive of continuous growth?
I like that.
Because I don't think it is at the moment. But I think that's the goal.
Mhm.
And I think everyone in the room, we all have limitations based on this instrument that's been created. And we're all trying to figure out how to use it to do this, but it's not translating yet to teachers who are going into the field. They feel like they're just repeating the same thing. And it's just a hurdle to get over to be allowed to have keys to a classroom, right? And if what our real goal is on continuous improvement, which we know takes an entire career, how can we change the instrument to make it fulfill those purposes?
Or change the accreditation process to take it off of the back of the candidates and put it more so in the lane of the institutions.
What do you mean by that?
Meaning, right now, it's high stakes for the candidates, right?
Mhm.
But through the accreditation process, I'm wondering how that process can be adjusted so that it's more of an institutional focus than a shining light on the student, you know what I mean?
To what you said about it, it's really assessing the program.
Yeah, it is. And I think if you embed it, like really embed it, not making it a separate piece of it, then you can. So take that load off of the student and it's not so high stakes.
and this is not within our scope, but it's in my brain. Is and then, because we want this to be long-term, we want it to go beyond induction. So that's where we get into looking at evaluations. So we have a growth model evaluation that we took from somewhere else, which is the same thing. It's setting a goal based on a CSTP. Setting a goal. That group and going through the exact same process in the course of a year. So every 2 years, you do the same thing. And so we can like, and still, this is the job.
And that's what, I mean, I think that's what Linda Darling-Hammond, when she first started this, that's why she then brought in national board certification, which is, I mean, it sort of goes back to some of the, you know, is it appropriate for beginning teachers? Some people who've done national board said, well, RDI-TPA really supported me in being able to do national board, because actually it was just another step of what I'd already been doing and could do and could show. And so, I mean, I think it's that continuum that is really important for teacher development. I know that lots of people don't bother doing national board. Depends on how much money their district's going to give them. If they give you 5,000, then yeah, I'll do it. Right? I mean, but it's, you know, but that's part of that process.
Yeah, that. I think somebody brought up yesterday that they can tell where their candidates went to school, kind of based on their perception of the TPA.
And their level of anxiety around it.
Yes, because I have had candidates that are like, oh, no big deal, I did this TPA, right?
Right.
And I've had some that are like, oh my gosh, this is like the TPA.
Yeah. And what causes anxiety, right? A lack of support, a lack of support.
And even within the same program, you have that variation
Yeah.
of approaches.
Absolutely.
Why?
Yeah.
But what's that syndrome that some kids come with, where they don't feel that they should be there?
Imposter syndrome.
Imposter syndrome. I mean, we have significant, because of it being Stanford, we have significant numbers of students who don't think they should be there and don't really understand how they got in, and that sort of adds to that whole process.
I would love to see data related to what causes the anxiety. I don't think those questions have been adequately asked, so we don't have that data. And it's hard to operate in this place of trying to find a new solution without really understanding all
And
of.
we don't really, you know what, that's interesting that you raised that point, because we don't really engage in the collection of qualitative data when we're trying to solve problems around this work. So like, you always get closest to the end user. And so you conduct empathy interviews to collect that data.
So if you look on the resources page, the survey that CTA did that has 1,200 responses, there's all of their open-ended responses. And if you start going through that with a qualitative lens, you do start to see some trends. There is some data there. I don't know that it's adequate, but at least someone asked the question.
Can we suggest that they conduct an empathy interview with some candidates? I don't know. If I'm crazy, tell me.
I don't think they've got a timeline that allows that, though.
Right, because
I mean, people would want to do it. I'm not an academic, don't do research, but I imagine that they would want, I don't know, a load of program coordinators to say, these are the sort of things I think, and then they would have to generate the questions that they're going to go out to candidates. And I mean, you could do like a temperature gauge thing where you ask the coordinators in each school, whoever has the major responsibility for the program.
That skews the data automatically, right? Because you're not going to the direct source, but we'll move on.
No, that's what I mean. Yeah.
So I'll start the timer for focus area 3 to keep us on time. That's time when we're supposed to transition back to main room.
Focus area 3, recommendations to strengthen the accreditation system to ensure programs embed the assessment in coursework and clinical work offer sufficient clinical and pedagogical support and support candidates to pass the assessment. And then there's the bullets, because they basically took that language and they bulleted it. So we've got ensure programs embed the assessments in coursework and clinical work. Ensure programs offer sufficient clinical and pedagogical support and support candidates to pass the assessments. Do we have that?
So if I could do point A and come back to, I had a question for Devin on kind of in the last one, but it actually fits into this one perfectly with the clinical work, because I've done student teaching supervision before. And when we fill out our forms, they are TPE based. So I'm looking for specific TPEs, but then you said you are encouraging, or however you would say it, your supervisors to align it more to a TPA model. So how does that look?
Correct. So they have to do both. I mean,
Okay.
it is a little extra awareness
Okay.
on the part of the supervisor. So they do have, because in a program, they have to focus on TPEs.
Okay.
They have to see and identify and evaluate their candidates based on TPEs that have been met.
Okay.
But in that process, they also understand what the TPA is looking for. So as they kind of chunk their instruction, there's certain things like, how are you creating a welcoming environment? How are you creating a positive learning environment? That's one of the TPEs, but it's also one of the TPAs, part of the TPA. And so what does that look like? Here's some examples on how you can do that. When I come in to see you, these are some things I'm going to be looking for. This is how it relates for me. Looking at the TPEs, this is how it relates for me, helping you with supporting you with the TPA. Same thing with your quality of instruction. Okay, are you providing engaging instruction? TPE is part of the TPA as well. So this is what some things look like. This is what I'm going to be looking for. This is how I'm going to evaluate you based on what I observe meeting the TPEs. In addition to, so it's kind of combined within there. So our supervisors, because prior to this, supervisors really had, just like the classroom teachers, very little to no knowledge on TPA. And so we had to provide a lot of professional development, just a lot of instruction and support to our supervisors who are observing. So they're familiar with what the TPA is looking for. So they're able to also provide, with, just limited instruction, limited information, but still support and still understand, how to meet both and measure both.
So pragmatically on your form, then as you're observing, so you can turn in these forms, do you then have like a list of TPEs and then you have a different form for TPA measurement, or you're just no?
Okay. The form that they use, so we're phasing away from Go React, but they use it's only TPE based.
Okay.
So TPE based. Did I say that right? TPE based, yeah. So all the TPA content is only discussion and debriefing. So there's nothing written to say this is the.
I'm wondering, do we see alignment, and not just specifically your program, but I'm just wondering in all programs, when student teachers are receiving feedback, how similar is it to their TPA outcome? Right? I'm wondering, are you getting the formative feedback you need to be able to then pass the TPA? Or are you doing well in your student teaching and then end up failing the TPA? I don't know, what's the correlation between those two performance?
Because if it's supposed to be in the clinical work, I mean, that's coming at the end mostly, right? So maybe programs need to not stop focusing so much on the micro of the TPE. Like, I saw this TPE happen. I saw this TPE happen. And then more so like, what are they what's going to help you with the TPA? Right. And then maybe those conferences that we have with our teachers or student teachers afterwards, like focus on that rather than sign this form saying that I saw TPE this, I saw TPE this, I saw TPE this, rather than maybe those conferences need to be more.
And we don't have,
Yes.
ours are interns, so.
Yeah.
I think the stressor may come from the structure of the TPA, because although there are several things that are seen within a lesson, it's just this one lesson. They have to encompass all of this content within 5-minute clips from this one lesson, and they stress out. They're like, well, I do that, but I do that throughout a lesson. How am I gonna capture this
In those few
in this
minutes.
few minutes? And so that's where a lot of the stress.
How many clips are they allowed for RDI-TPA?
I mean, what?
How many clips are they allowed?
Well, cycle one, they have to submit 3 clips
Three
for
clips.
one lesson. From cycle two, it's multiple lessons,
Okay.
like 5 clips total. But, yeah, so they're stressing because they're thinking, okay, well, I know how to create a positive and safe learning environment. I know how to incorporate UDL practices. I know how to give academic language development. I know how to do all those things, and it happens over, 30, 40-minute lesson if it's a block schedule longer. And then they're thinking, wow, I gotta make sure I squeeze all this stuff in. And then if they feel like they were missing anything, it just, their world falls apart. Because they're like, I'm gonna fail this thing.
So then that kind of goes back to that duplicative conversation too, right? So they finish that 5-minute clip and think, well, that I didn't get it all in. So now I need to do it again. And so then the question becomes, do they just teach the same lesson and kind of fake it? Or do I have to start from square one all over again? And so I think that piece of it is duplicative, right? When you didn't quite meet the standard in that opportunity, now I have to do it again.
It's also not authentic, is it?
And then it's not
Yeah, it's not.
authentic anymore.
That's one of the, I mean, I would say that's a big thing. It's particularly with the video piece of it, is the lack of authenticity around what they're expected to submit. Whether in RDI-TPA, it's 2 clips, can be from any of the 3 lessons that they've submitted the lesson plans, but it's only 2 clips you're allowed, maximum of 20 minutes in total. So you have to get all of the things that they're trying, because you've got to answer all the prompts and say where in the clip it is that someone can see it. And in 20 minutes out of a whole lesson.
And I think that's where the assessor piece is important, because a lot of our candidates, they'll record a lesson and then someone comes into their classroom where they may have a random outburst from a student and they're thinking, I can't get this on video. I can't
do this.
Can't do this.
Yeah.
Where anyone who's been in the classroom knows it's going to be unpredictable. And so assessing that, and you see, a kid with a random outburst, or you see somebody walking up, talking to the teacher, or coming in and out of the classroom. Those are things that naturally happen. Those are authentic experiences, but they're frowned upon, if submitted for their CalTPA, and that's going to definitely hurt their score.
In RDI-TPA, I mean, one of our students wanted to submit a clip where a kid was pretending to bark all the way through it. This is a kid who's got, an IEP, and he was just barking all the way through it. I actually convinced the student to write about that, though, and put that in as an explanation about what was going on in the class. But they decided not to and said, no, I'll just refilm it.
So I'm gonna bring us back. Focus area 3, do we have information in our notes about ensuring programs embed the assessment in coursework and clinical work? Yes, we do, correct?
I don't.
Think the documentation we have right now shows
I thought that was
But we
the
had a
recommendation
conversation
that came
earlier.
from Devin.
that we need to ask for it.
Yes.
Okay, great. I thought you were asking.
Yes.
And then, any other thoughts on A before we move on? I think we have some things related to B, but I'm not 100% sure. Are we okay to move on to B?
I think just as a last comment on A is that I'm feeling throughout this is that we need to, a lot of this needs to shift to the teacher prep program, and it feels like it's falling on the shoulders of the teacher candidate and not so much on the teacher prep program. That's what I'm getting, yeah.
So then moving on to B, ensure programs offer sufficient clinical and pedagogical support and support candidates to pass the assessments. I know we had a lot of conversation around Devin's program and the way that program is structured. Any other thoughts about that you want to put on the table right now, or questions that we have to ask about that?
What types of support are candidates allowed to receive? That's an ongoing question, and it usually comes up oftentimes in our coordinator meetings with the commission, addressing those appropriate and inappropriate support policy of that list. I think maybe that needs to be revisited. But
I also think, going back to the whole conversation of validity, we talked about, well, how are teacher prep programs doing versus one another? I mean, that would definitely let us know if we are ensuring programs are doing that, right? If some programs are struggling to have successful candidates, right? Then they probably aren't offering the sufficient clinical and pedagogical support. So that would be something that we would need to see the data across the board, right?
And that kind of relates to item C, which is shall report the number of programs with low pass
For
rate.
sure.
What, I have to ask what anyone thinks they might mean by low.
Yeah.
Lower than average. I mean, so you just get the average pass rate, and if you're below that, everyone below that is low. I don't know. Bottom 25% of pass rates. I don't know.
That's a great
Yeah,
question
it's a
to
great
ask.
question. Because I
don't know what low really means.
How is low defined?
Yeah, because I would just assume it would be whoever's below the minimal pass. So,
I'm just gonna set that.
Or below the mean, right?
But yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
you know, is it everyone
Yeah.
below the mean or
Mm.
bottom 20,
Yeah.
20th percentile?
I would certainly want to look at those for sure,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't know. That's a great question.
Low overall pass rates or low pass rates based on rubric scores?
The first time or second time, does that count as a? They're allowed
Yeah.
to, I mean, you know, one, just the first time pass rate or the second time pass rate? I mean.
Yeah, and are they, to your point earlier, you said Stanford has this high pass rate, but if you drill down and
They have as high.
like you were saying, like, well, are they low pass rates just for everybody, or are we specifically looking because you were saying?
Those groups within.
Yes, yeah, because then, I mean, if it's just overall, well, Stanford's doing a great job, but still there's some kids that need that, so maybe.
But I do
yeah.
find it interesting because your program offers clinical, obviously student teaching.
Mhm.
Intern programs don't,
Right.
and they're still passing.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting question.
Mhm.
All right, and then anything else regarding B or C?
Is there a I mean, I know that I can't. We've only just done accreditation. I can't remember, and luckily, it's not my job to do. But is there like a column? I mean, there's a column where you put like an X for each of the TPEs for coursework and clinical work, isn't? Am I right? But there isn't a column that has performance assessment.
So there's a matrix where you indicate for every TPE that is in your program where it's introduced, practiced, and assessed.
Okay, and okay, so there's not a column going the other way in the sense that says the teacher TPA assesses.
No, but what they do is they interview your folks.
Right, yeah.
And they
yeah.
ask
No,
your
I got
candidates,
interviewed on that.
how does your program support you in preparing for the TPAs?
Okay.
And they ask your clinical practice supervisors, how do you support candidates in passing their TPAs? So that's their means to obtain that
Okay.
information.
It's not on the matrix.
So it's not
It's
like
not
a
on the
checkbox
matrix.
on the matrix. Okay. I don't know whether it should be if it's
That's a good
if
question.
if it's three aspects to assessing the student and assessing the university in this particular thing
Right.
or school and the program, if there are three aspects to it, then the aspect of the performance assessment should be in the same sort of category, shouldn't it? As coursework and clinical work, or is it a subset of clinical work? I don't know.
I don't know.
So then that hides it all away then, in a sense, about where are the candidates on that particular?
Mhm.
Are they doing it in their clinical work but not in their
Yeah.
TPA?
And it's interesting because I won't name any institution, but when I've been on accreditation visits and I'm a lead for accreditation visits, the truth comes out. Like if there's a program that's not adequately preparing candidates, those candidates are telling it, and it's like, so
Now, is there a listing, or does someone compile, or is this unique to programs? What evidence-based strategies are being used or are available to support candidates? Is that just something internal? Or is there a general kind of understanding of?
You're asking like, is there a resource
Right.
document from CTC,
Evidence-based strategies.
evidence-based strategies for embedding?
Yeah, I did a quick Google search on that. I'm glad you raised that because I'd forgotten that was one of the things. I did a quick Google search on evidence-based strategies for supporting, and not that much comes up.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how much evidence-based there is for supporting students to do, teacher candidates to do this work.
And I think it still goes back to, one of the things you mentioned, Mandy, that whole expectation we can't really talk about the core of the TPAs. There's still a sense of that out there where people are really hesitant to dive into TPAs and look at candidates' responses, again, kind of not crossing that line over acceptable and unacceptable support. And so it just seems like, well, on one hand, we're not really being provided or given the okay to provide to give those evidence-based strategies, in a way that's going to be extremely supportive of our candidates.
Yeah, and so can I raise a question on that? It says the commission shall report the number and assist, so the commission shall assist the program. So is there a department?
There's a work
Here?
group that they have. I think their meetings are on, I forget what day of the week, like, there's a day of the week where they have sessions for CalAPA support.
Okay,
It's like a community of practice. There's a community of practice that's led by the commission for TPAs.
okay,
So that happened. I don't know what day of the week it basically is, but I know they're happening because my directors attend them.
okay, so the commission does have a department on, or some kind of, like you said, work
Yeah.
group that is doing this, and then who's on that group? Are those?
They have a panel of experts, because I know for the Cal TPA, I think it's the first Thursday of the month, and they're just people there just to engage in conversation, discussion.
And like for administrator preparation programs, the big next thing is how do we support those in the early education world now that we're developing a PK3 credential? Like how can we best support our candidates through that? So they did like a
So these are experts in the field that are appointed by the commission to come in and assist these.
Well, those meetings are set up to
Okay.
pose
And
questions.
it's, like I said, it's more like a community of practice. So if Devin's there and he shares an idea, we might amplify his voice in that meeting. Sometimes they invite experts, but it really is a community of practice.
Okay,
So
because I'm just, to your point of like, is there a document? I'm actually trying to think like who's coming in to actually, like, what is the commission actually doing to help the programs that they deem?
well, I know for a fact that when I was on the Cal APA design team, there was a gentleman who was up in Sacramento who was struggling, and he was like really struggling, and they paired me with him. And so we met like 3 times. I shared resources with him. So I know that happens as well.
And I just coming from as a public school teacher, when I start seeing these things with low pass rates and assist these programs, I often think of these as punitive measures. And so I think we need to make sure that these aren't following the same way, right? That we focus on the positive and the formative nature of helping a teacher with that program, rather than the punitive where we often go in education, right? That if you're in a school and you're not meeting your benchmarks, somebody's going to come in and replace or tell you what's going on rather than actually support you and help you in this. So that would be one of my concerns as far as.
And so for accreditation, if there are findings or stipulations, then you get another opportunity for that. So if you look at the accreditation website, you can pull up those reports and you can see over time who's been involved and who's included and all of that. So I don't just sharing that.
Yeah.
So then are we?
I don't know, but playing devil's advocate is if there are programs that have such a low pass rate that those students are not being supported into the profession. While I want to give the program lots of time to improve, I worry about all those candidates that are getting left behind and are not entering the field.
I will say programs do close.
Mhm.
There was a program that I was formerly involved with, which closed eventually because, you know,
Sure.
they didn't have the manpower.
And
whatever it might
and the
be.
same thing with the public school. If it's chronically underserving its population, right, and it's not preparing, I understand. But just, I don't know if there is is there a, lack of better term, behavior contract? Yeah, so.
Do, like
Yeah.
they will pair them up with another institution and do that sort of thing, but ultimately, I think you raise a great point, Mandy, like candidates are paying for these services.
For sure.
It's not like pre-K 12 students where
Mhm.
they're attending their local school and,
Mhm.
you know,
Mhm.
theoretically, they don't have a choice in the matter. Like they're paying for this institution to.
Sure.
So.
I have just a clarifying question. I'm just reading this from kind of a candidate's perspective. When it says there should be no fees to the candidate for these instructional supports, is that no fees from the commission or is that no fees, period,
institution, yeah.
including institutions?
So we provide TPA and RECA support to our candidates for no extra fee.
No extra fee.
No
What does that
additional
support
fee.
include? What is,
So for example, we still have a number of students who need to pass RECA. So we have online sessions where they can join us and, you know, I can share the content with you if you care to see it, but there's a process that we go through to prepare them. Also for TPAs as well. So we don't charge anything additional. Candidates from institutions find out about that because they're friends with other teachers and whatnot, and they show up at our session and they're like, can we attend? We're associated with this institution of higher ed, but they're not offering anything, and we let them join.
so does that apply to all programs?
Well, I would think, are those,
That may be
yeah.
unique, but I don't, because I can tell you now, I know several Cal States that offer programs or courses that candidates have to pay for.
Mhm.
And some don't offer any support at
And
all.
some offer no support at all. So
Yeah.
back to that question.
Because they're different, because they're units that are assigned to it, they have.
Well, yeah, I mean, well,
Or.
They just, because the instructors who are running it
Mhm.
say, well, how am I gonna get compensated for providing the support? And so they have to charge
Yeah.
the candidate in order.
And we have a different
Right.
structure. We're all salaried, so nobody's asking those questions where I'm at because everybody's salaried. So
Yeah,
we're.
these are salaries, so they're looking for overload as well. So it's
We
like,
don't- Yeah, I know that. I know that.
so I'm just kind of curious.
They would have to hire a lecturer and adjunct to fill that spot, right? So if you have staff that are going to do that, I'm trying to think of a university and they don't have a tenure track or associate assistant professor that wants to take that on, they would have to, it's like student teaching supervision often goes to adjuncts. And so they would have to pay those adjuncts to do that work. So, yeah.
So do they just absorb that cost?
They would have to if that.
And that's because the way it's written, it reads as the commission shall, and then it follows with all this stuff. But I'm just wondering if that also.
I did.
applies.
I just said, what does there shall be no fees to candidates for these instructional supports
So-
actually mean?
Yeah, because I know like at Cal State Los Angeles, we have a TPA course. But it's a course though, so the students are.
They're
enrolling
paying.
in that, yeah, so.
I would bet
Yeah.
money that that course is on your matrix
Mhm.
that shows where you're introducing practice
Yeah.
and assessing.
So then that would not be free. Or, yeah,
I believe this is new language that would be adopted in 1263 that isn't current
Okay.
practice. So this is new practice. So it's not currently probably happening in
Yeah.
every institution. But then
Yeah.
the law would shift to make it a responsibility.
so then the way that the Cal State fee structure is set up with you take 0 to 6 units and 6 and above, they would have to adjust this as well then, right? Because then that would no longer be able to count as a unit towards something. Yes, so, yeah.
For us to recognize, it's not only about institutions of higher ed, it's also about LEAs. And so
For sure.
that's probably why it's not specifying that.
Yeah.
So I'm going to move us on to D. Assist these programs to use evidence-based strategies to support candidates to pass the assessment for all administrators of the assessment.
That's the question I had.
I think we,
Yeah, we
Yeah.
were talking, and that's what I was asking those questions about. Who are the people and where, how do you access the support?
and what is the evidence?
Yeah.
Yeah, we'd like to see some.
Mhm.
I mean, I'd love to see some.
Yeah.
It would be very helpful.
How much time do you have?
We have,
Yeah.
just under 5 minutes.
Transition back.
Yeah, well, we're supposed to transition at 11:50, so we have 4 minutes and 34 seconds.
Any other last,
Transition at 11:50.
any other last minute thoughts before we transition? All right, great work, team.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, this was great.
Thank you.
I appreciate all of you.
Yeah. And we actually got. I was. Formative assessments. We made it.
Did not.
Very nice collaboration.
Did you guys get it?
Contributions. Yeah.
The whole thing? Well, the three you assigned us.
So it's enough time to make sure that we touched on all.
Timekeeper was very effective.
So, yeah,
That's awesome.
yes.
If you'd like to promote us. We'll take any honored. Call my superintendent.
So how much time?
We'll see.
About 25 minutes.
So Josh, we've got 25 minutes.
45 minutes left, okay. So are we not keeping without our?
I
meeting
think
comes
so
to order?
because,
Okay.
yeah,
All right.
and he'll come in hopefully soon.
So should I start our 20-minute clock? We'll stop, because we'll do this time. Okay, so 20 minutes.
And so our goal is to be able to synthesize what we shared earlier so that we can present it to the larger group. So, I feel like, man, if we could just see your notes, but we
I
can't.
know.
Yeah.
I know.
So,
Okay, so I'm wondering, as I'm looking through this, do you think,
if we go by question or,
I'm wondering if we should be pulling out the questions that we have
that's what I'm thinking. So I-
more than the
yeah.
other pieces? What do you
That
think?
makes sense. I'm envisioning three main slides. The one with the feedback for focus area 2. Am I missing something? Focus area 2,
Because they want 1 and 2, correct?
1 and 2, and if we have 3.
Yeah, if we have.
But we
three,
did have questions for 3 as well.
Yeah, I think we should probably pose them.
Yeah, for sure,
Right?
especially since we were the rock stars of the.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna go down here and write presentation, and then I'm just gonna lift the things from
Okay.
above.
And are you working in Google or?
No, because it won't let, I might be able to now,
The internet is back up.
Because if you could, then you could share the slides and we could.
but technically we have to use our CTC.
Yes, you do.
Yes.
And if that doesn't have.
I don't
Google
know what,
access?
because it's Microsoft. All right, I'm gonna do it my very best to articulate.
Okay,
How does that, I'm not
that's okay.
an auditory learner, so that's hard for me. Definitely visual. Okay, so the first part was valid and authentic to the work of teaching. So one of the things that was brought up is that we need data to determine valid and authentic.
Mhm.
Someone else said we need results, someone said data. I think it's kind of getting to the same thing.
And can you add, not only do we need the data, but we need to know what the community's feedback was on that.
Tell me more.
So when they developed the TPAs, they collected feedback from the field about it. And so I think that's the data that we would like to see, is what the field has to say about it.
So we need to know the field's feedback of the TPA process.
Mhm.
And when you're saying
As
the
well as the
field,
candidates' feedback.
so tell me more about when you say field.
So, for
Do you
example,
mean-
if you're an administrator, if you're
Classroom
teacher preparation program, if you're a classroom teacher, it was open to everybody to provide feedback. And so we would like to see that feedback as well as the feedback from the candidates.
but also the going beyond the statistics.
Yes, that's what
And
I'm
the
saying.
psychometrics, going beyond those reports. And, you know, what did other users, clients, whatever you want to call them,
Stakeholders.
stakeholders, what were their views on it being authentic?
Yeah.
I think that's what we.
Okay. Someone else commented that the quality of the program is being compromised by the focus on the statistics, which kind of goes to that. But let's uplift that as kind of a reason why we're asking for that data. Does that sound?
Mhm.
So our perception is that the quality of the program is being compromised by the focus.
Did someone say compromised? Is it?
That's what someone said earlier.
The quality of, repeat it, the quality.
Seems a
of the
bit.
program.
Quality of the program is being compromised by the focus on the psychometrics, the
Is it the
statistics.
quality of the program or the quality of the assessment that we're focusing on?
The comment earlier was program.
Do you want to revisit that before we submit it? Yeah.
Yeah, because it's not,
How about the quality of the implementation of the assessment
oh, right, okay,
is being compromised?
yes. It could be compromised.
Could be.
Compromised, if it only relies on psychometrics and statistical analysis,
And does not account
Yeah,
for the
but-
qualitative.
you know, for the qualitative feedback, yeah.
Are you okay with that too, Rebecca?
Yep.
Fantastic. If Devin were here.
Rather.
By so waiting for his
So if
consent.
the focus is only on the statistics rather than inclusive of the qualitative
Mhm.
feedback.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. That kind of encapsulated that first
Can you
conversation.
read it one more time, just so I can?
Yeah. So the first bullet point is looking at valid and authentic to the work of teaching. We would like to see more data to help determine what is valid or authentic beyond the psychometrics.
Yes,
Our perception is that the quality of the implementation of the assessment could be compromised if the focus is only on the statistics rather than inclusive of the qualitative feedback.
There you go.
We need to know the candidate and the stakeholders' feedback of the TPA process. Right? Fantastic. The next section was formative. Yay, welcome back.
Where's that?
So we barely got started.
So we just wrapped up, we got about, so I'll jump in, we got about 13 minutes, yeah.
Okay, so far we've only covered valid and authentic. We're on to formative.
Yeah.
And there's lots here. So just trying to think of what to pull out.
How in depth or deep is our presentation? Are we just kind of hitting?
5 to 10 minutes. And I think the focus is to pull out some of the questions that we have or the needs that we have.
Yep, for sure, that's how I took it.
So one of the long parts of the conversation that we had was based on how a student could submit the same material and get different scores.
Mhm.
And how that can be prohibitive in the formative process. Because one person's giving positive feedback and someone else is not, and then
Well, are they?
they might digress.
That's not what we said was it's not formative because they're not getting feedback.
That's later down here. That's maybe we lead with that.
Yeah,
Okay.
and then that
So-
can come into your points, I think you made the point of resubmitting or whatever, and jeopardizing a passing score for a non-passing score.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe we start with formative implies that
The candidate would receive.
the candidate
Substantive feedback.
receives substantive feedback in the moment. Not in the moment, frequent,
Yeah. I mean,
At least they would receive some feedback. They're not getting any.
Right now, it's kind of cookie cutter template.
how about
Paste.
that the candidate receives substantive feedback that informs,
it would be okay, if we put timely substantive feedback in front of that,
Mhm.
because timely is part of formative.
Yeah.
Making you go back to. Finish your thought, and you have to go back.
no, that's okay, I love it. Okay, so timely substantive
Yeah.
feedback that informs,
On their progress on the TPE, right? Or on the TPE, the focus or.
Or towards mastery, right? Because I mean, that's what a
Towards next step, so.
next steps, yeah. Towards next steps,
towards
towards mastery,
improvement.
towards improvement.
Yeah,
Towards improvement.
Okay, so we talked about the current practice. What was the piece you wanted to pull in?
What, read it back one more time?
What we wrote down there?
Yeah.
Formative implies that the candidate receives timely substantive feedback that informs next steps towards improvement.
Mhm.
And is this where we had the conversation over duplicity?
No, that comes later. Yeah, that was in our next one. That was in section 2, I
And I
think.
think there was also the point that we made about in 1997, formative meant something very different than it does today. And so is this really an interim assessment? Or is it a summative assessment?
So current process provides a score, which we believe is summative in nature.
I don't wanna, it's up to the group. As I recall our conversation, I thought where we landed, but correct me if I'm wrong, is that it is a formative assessment, not of the candidate, but of the program that they're in.
That was just, yeah, something that I had thrown out there, because it just seems as. Yeah, I kind of mentioned.
I think during that conversation, we also had we discussed in what is the time, what is the specific time that they are thinking of? Is it the teacher prep? Is it, what is it not it's anymore, is it? Is it including the lifespan of an educator?
That's
Yes.
a key question.
Yes.
Is it
Yeah.
a formative assessment of their early experience in preliminary
Mhm.
and clear
Yes.
phases of,
Mhm.
or something to that effect?
Yeah.
Okay, so is the law
Mhm.
or
Or does the law imply?
Yes.
does the law imply that the formative nature of this assessment is embedded in teacher preparation alone
yeah,
or in
Induction
or inclusive of
yes, of induction.
of induction and
further.
Yeah.
and evaluation, right?
Yeah,
And future evaluations.
Can I suggest maybe we change the word embed, because I see
Mhm.
embedded in this all over the place, so I don't, maybe contained or something, if you guys have a better word. Because I don't want that to
I like contain.
contain, okay.
So does the law imply that the formative nature of this assessment is contained in teacher preparation alone?
Mhm.
Or is it inclusive of induction and future
Well,
evaluation?
Yes.
teacher preparation is inclusive of the preliminary as well as induction. So I would say, instead of saying,
In
I
in
would say in the
preliminary?
preliminary
Okay.
phase as well as the induction phase.
Okay. So we talked about, and we can erase this comment from here or finish it. But there was a lot of discussion about how at the end of it, all someone gets is a score and not authentic feedback, right? So I just tried to capture, said current process provides a score. Should I just say, but does not include more holistic feedback?
Or qualitative feedback or something. So.
Yeah, I don't know, I just, something else just popped into my brain. Would this suggest, I mean, this entire process of what we're doing, would this suggest that recommendations we're making for revision of the TPA, and will it allow everyone to pass on the first attempt? I mean, is that, are we
Is that a
just,
goal?
is that a goal? Is that
It
something?
could be. It could also be a goal that no one needs to pass in order to move to the next phase. We could get rid of the whole high stakes component of it. Anything's an option.
Well, I mean, that's why we're here. I think if I understood you right, is that's what CTA's, yeah, it's flying right now, is that we just get rid of the whole thing, right?
Well, no, that ship sailed.
Oh, that's just-
Someone might bring that ship back.
Well, I mean, some people might suggest that that's the only way to fix, right? I don't know.
Yeah.
Depends where we get to at the end of it.
Then that takes us back to reliable, authentic,
Mhm.
because if a test is easy enough, or everyone passes on the first attempt, then
What
it's
does that say?
validity goes out the window.
But if it's no longer a pass or not pass, it's just get feedback to inform the next step. There isn't a pass, no pass component.
I almost wonder if too many people get caught up in the backlog of that shift. If it shifts to feedback, and you get more 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 feedback. I worry about that.
Would that be duplicative?
Yes.
And so then you have institutions where you have people not passing.
Well, because then you get caught in a formative loop then, right? And it's duplicitous because you always, I mean, it's always formative, right? So like you can always learn. You can always learn, you can always get more feedback, you can always keep working towards something, so, yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
Real flexibility. And then for institutions, what does that mean in terms of tuition? At an institution like Stanford, that's very costly for that candidate to keep
Most of us don't pay.
taking attempts. I don't know that that's gonna be a positive thing, is what I'm
And
saying.
it's even at other institutions, if, I mean, as the language says, it's supposed to be no cost, but if we're, I mean, the universities then, not even Stanford, but the Cal State system is gonna have to absorb that cost, right? So.
So we definitely want to ask that question about the support of the commission and whether institutions can or cannot charge for additional support.
But if
That's
it's
in
not,
section 3, right?
Yeah.
if it's not that if it's not consequential in the recommendation for, which is the words they use, I think, don't they, statisticians, if it's not a consequential event, but it is a feedback event, then that puts it back on the institution to say, okay, so you got like 3 ones, we can't recommend you for a credential at the moment. So it's actually part of that debate about whether it's going back, you know, whether the institution should have more control and implementation of whatever the performance is, like it was with PACT or whatever. And if it's not consequential, then why are we doing this in a sense?
But if someone was skilled, going back to earlier conversation, skilled and adept at written assessment or passing those, do they not get the feedback then? Do they not receive feedback? Then it's not, then all of a sudden you have a formative assumptive at the same time for different people.
And that's what it's sort of opened up
Yeah.
with the secondary passing standard now, where we can, if they're within 3 points of passing. I mean, first of all, there's the whole passing thing, you know, New York was always at 39 instead of 41.
How many minutes do we?
Random.
Yes, we have 2 minutes and 6 seconds.
So we gotta get to.
Not even up to two. Okay.
Well, if it goes back in, we'll have to ask her.
So I think.
I'm saying that everyone got to three, so I think.
Okay, I just lifted the questions that were also there. So there were 4 other questions. How do the results of the induction plan get to the induction programs? Is it even possible to make the TPA assessment formative in alignment with the law? Does a student's lack of being able to use written language deny them a teaching career?
Say that last piece again.
Does a student's, I guess it would be candidates, lack of being able to use academic language deny them a teaching career?
Written academic language. Based on the TPA.
The opposed sort of language.
How about the written academic language expected
Yes.
Expected.
in the TPA?
Yes.
Deny them a career. And then we had several questions about just, is the TPA appropriate for a beginning teacher? That, okay. There was lots of other substance in that, but no other questions. Josh asked how often does accreditation occur, but then Ursula answered that. And then someone else, I think Josh, you asked again, do they review the institution's pass rates? And we said yes, but we'd like to look at that data. So that, provide data related to pass rates for institutions.
Yeah.
Okay, is that our time to go?
Do you want me to go see if I can find Adam to see if we can get more?
Continue.
And you continue, yeah. And what are you guys asking for? 5 minutes? 10 minutes?
5 minutes.
Okay. I'll see if I can find my request.
And then, okay, so the next one, we had a long conversation about duplicative, right? So we talked about how the law says that it shouldn't be duplicative, but the very nature of
The matrix.
the matrix and the feedback is duplicative.
The learning cycle.
Okay,
So
so,
in 1997, when this law was established, the matrix didn't exist yet. Somewhere in there, the matrix evolved, which requires us to state where the TPE is introduced, practice.
so we're talking about the matrix for accreditation.
Yes. And so the very nature of that calls for some duplicitness.
So it calls duplicity. So I guess our question would be, how can we
Address this.
modify the process to align with the law that calls for it not to be duplicative?
Mhm.
Is
So
that capturing? Yep, go ahead.
you are in charge of time extensions. So if you believe that we should have 5 more minutes, we are entitled to that.
Curious, do candidates see lesson plan development as duplicative work? Because in every course, there's a lesson plan that they develop. I'm just still throwing out more things into my mind about this whole issue.
I think those are the right questions, right?
So-
To be-
How about we ask it more broadly? What exactly
Is meant by
is
duplicity.
meant by duplicative?
And I think that gets to kind of what we were saying earlier about reading different data sources. It's clearly someone has said this process is too duplicative, it's burdensome, it's cumbersome, right?
You need
So we need to know what was behind that. Because we're not identifying it, right? We can see how it can be iterative and that's useful. So we need to understand what part of that repetition becomes burdensome, needs to be removed or altered.
Okay, we need to understand what part of the duplicative process is burdensome to candidates. Okay. No one else can look at my notes because I don't know how to spell that word. Um. This was an interesting question Rebecca posed, but could this process of learning go beyond just the preliminary credential and extend into the induction and evaluation process? Was part of that conversation. I don't know if we want to uplift that. Ursula asked, can we suggest that they conduct a survey, perhaps also ask coordinators what is causing anxiety with the TPA process?
Or can we ask, do we know? Do we know why candidates are anxious about the TPA process? Maybe that's a better question.
Maybe someone's already gathered that information.
Okay.
I mean, you know, I know from our individual, our small group of candidates, because I posed that question to our candidates to find out from their thoughts, but a broader scale would be nice to see.
Is there a way to collect this data? Okay. There's so many other things that we talked about.
And it's 1:15 right now, so.
So we should go back.
We had 2 minutes, though. I started the 5 minutes mark when you said that it was approved.
Um,
2 minutes if you want to use them.
So one of the other questions that was lifted was, is it necessary or valuable to do the coursework and then to do it again in the TPA? Is that duplicative?
But I think we already established that, right? That it's what you brought up about the lesson plans, right? Do candidates consider it to be duplicitous if you're introducing the lesson plan template and then they're revisiting that again as you're performing the TPA? I don't know.
Yeah, we would say it wasn't. We would say it's a part of the education process.
Because you're gonna be.
But I have a feeling the candidate would say otherwise. Right?
Well,
Yeah,
we have a feeling, but we don't have any data.
Which is what we need data for, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so what do candidates report is duplicative in the credentialing process?
Regarding the
TPA, yeah.
Yes.
What do
Regarding
candidates report?
the TPA. Okay,
TPA.
I think we have good questions. I think we have enough to offer. It's not. It doesn't conclude everything we discussed, but
Yeah, I think we agree.
okay. Does anyone else want to report? I'm gonna pass my computer to someone.
As you said, they're the only ones.
Yes.
Did you forget how I spelled?